All right, so tonight we are starting a brand new series, and it is all about emotions, and we're calling it Dealing with Feeling. And I think this is appropriate for this year because we've all definitely felt a little off, but it's probably got to be really crazy for you as teenagers. You guys experience all sorts of different emotions, probably on a daily, if not weekly basis, and well, that's what we want to talk about and help you all with. But first, I wanted to talk about these guys right here. I gave the gals this. This is my favorite ever since the beginning of quarantine. Probably go-to snack, but I am 100% certain now the Black Forest gummies are the best gummy bears. No. Yes, I did at your suggestion, and I couldn't taste the difference between them. Now, let me tell you why I like these, okay? Not only do they smell amazing, they smell good. They're the perfect amount of chewy, but something that is true about these gummy bears that are not true necessarily of other gummy bears or not true as much as these gummy bears is they really have definitive different flavor between the different colors. How many of you guys have ever experienced where you're just like, they all just taste the same? Yeah? And like this little guy right here now, he's green, right? And I can taste that. That's a green apple gummy bear right there. And this one has like 6 different flavors. And sometimes you can even combine them to make like new flavor combinations. Like one of my favorites is probably the reds with the oranges and the greens with the yellows. Yeah, that's what I like. And I know to each person their own, but this reminds me a lot about what I want to talk to you guys about tonight for a couple of reasons. But first, we just recognize that in life, just like there's many different flavors of these gummies and different combinations, it seems like emotions come in many different varieties, and sometimes they mix to make different emotions. And they take us on all sorts of, well, emotional journeys. And we experience them a lot. Just show of hands, in the last week, how many of you guys have laughed? Like a real good laugh, like you actually joyful, okay? Okay. Keep your hand raised if you've also cried this week, okay? All right, okay. And gotten angry this week? Yeah. Okay, hands down. And sometimes there are combinations of those. Like there can be like a joyful cry, where you're so happy, you cry, rather than a sad cry. There are a variety of complex emotions in life, and even the Bible points out how many there really is. I was reading something recently that said Jesus himself, just in the Gospels, those are the 4 books about his life, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, just 4 books, Jesus expressed 39 different emotions. For everything from sorrow to compassion to joy and to anger. And I certainly believe God gave us all of these, but it's not just as easy to have them as much as to be in control of them. And sometimes they get the best of us. How many are familiar with the movie Inside Out? How many of you guys saw that movie? Okay, it's a few years old now. But for those of you who don't know, the idea of Inside Out is that everybody in their head is like at least these 5 emotions, and they take turns taking control of like this board, and it controls people's actions. And in the movie, there's this little girl named Riley, and she has them just kind of go off at a moment's notice depending on who's pushing the buttons or the levers. There's this little bit at the beginning when she's young, and it's just like first there's just happiness, and then there's sadness too, and then there's paranoia or fear and disgust come in, and there's also anger. And just like one scene, the child goes from being told that they need to eat this green vegetable that they don't want to eat, and they're like, no thank you, to then freaking out in anger because they won't get desserts if they don't eat that, and they don't think that's fair. And finally, the dad gives them the little airplane, goes, here goes the broccoli, and then the kid finds that funny, and so they're laughing and everything's fine. And it seems like we go through all of those just at a drop of a hat, and so that is true about the movie, but something that I realized that is not true that the movie lets on is that we don't have control. They have control over us. And that's kind of something that I think a lot of people believe, that they can't have control over their own emotions. And I want to look at God's scriptures tonight and at least establish this fact as like kind of our opening night of this series. So we are going to take a look first at the life of Jesus, and then we're going to look in a book called Romans. You see, what I want to tell you about Jesus' life is that it's in the Bible it says that Jesus experienced everything of the human life, the fullness, every temptation that we experience, he experienced. We talked about that in the last series, and that's a great comfort to us to know that we're not alone. But the Bible also says another interesting fact. It says, though Jesus lived the full human experience, he never sinned. And so he could feel anger, but not let anger take over him and do something wrong. Or he could feel sorrow, but not lose control of himself. A lot of us think we can't control our emotions, but Jesus, being fully God and fully human, showed us that that's totally possible. And the Bible kind of spells this out in two different categories, two different mindsets is what it's called. And so I want to talk about these two different mindsets with you all tonight. The first one is called the flesh. Everybody say flesh. All right, just make sure you guys are hearing me right. Flesh, you know, like the flesh, like on your body, there is the flesh. And there is also the spirit. Everybody say spirit. But the spirit it's talking about here is not just your spirit, but God's spirit, because when you see this, it's going to be a capital S. So I wanted to establish those two things real quick. Let's take a look at what it has to say here in Romans 8, 5 and 6. Paul writes, those who live according to the flesh have their mind set on what the flesh desires. But those who live in accordance to the Spirit, capital S there, Spirit, have their mind set on what the Spirit desires. And he writes about this in another book called Galatians, which we will get to next week as we divide these into a little bit more categories. But when he gives these lists, you can look at the flesh, the things that the body physically wants or just craves is a way different category than the kind of category of emotions that are associated with God's Spirit. Just to give you a couple real quick, we'll go into them more deeply next week. But of the flesh, you have things like partaking in sin, hatred, jealousy, selfishness, and causing quarrels and fights. Okay? Whereas things of God's Spirit include things like love, peace, patience, kindness, self-control, gentleness. These are two completely different camps. And so that's why he says in the verse, people who have their mind set on this type of stuff are only focused on that. Whereas if you have your mind set on this, then it's more like that. So let's continue as he describes that in Romans chapter 8. He goes on to say this. The mind governed by the flesh is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. Now we're going to talk about this idea throughout tonight about fruit. The idea is that it is something that is evidence of growth in a certain direction. And so when we talk about fruit, we're not just talking about this kind of fruit here, but a harvest of character is what I'm going to call it. So let's just kind of look at two quick examples of this to make sure that we're all on the same page here. On this side, we might have this person who's completely dedicated as far as it is to living a life of the flesh. anger, selfishness, hatred. This is the person that walks into your math class every morning and just kind of gives you an ugly look. He's like, get out of my way, chump. And then it's just sitting there like kicking the back of your chair, and they don't care what's going on. They're talking, over everybody else. They don't care about the other people are trying to learn. And then when somebody's asking them please to stop it, instead of complying, this person's just going to sit there and they are going to belittle and talk bad about anybody who challenges them on anything. This person's life is just living out death. Like all around them. They're making others feel bad because of their choices and how they are acting. They will be a lonely person because they don't have anybody who wants to be their friend. It's just death is what it's summed up as. Now on the other side we have the life of the Spirit. This would be somebody who walks into your class in the morning, and this person notices everybody and says, Peyton, how was your weekend? Even if they're not friends, they're still friendly towards everyone. And they carry a sense of kindness about them. This person probably has such a healthy outlook that even though they might see somebody else with something they wish they had, they're not choosing jealousy and bitterness. Instead, they can wish that person well, that, wow, I'm glad that things are going well for them. In the meantime, I'm content with what I have. And so my life is not full of that death. Instead, it's more of life. And I'm not just providing life for myself. I'm providing life to those around me because people are seeing me and they're saying, wow, that person has something about them. This person over here, they're bearing fruit in their life that is bad fruit. This person over here is bearing good fruit in their lives. And this is what the Bible is talking about, this fruit of the flesh or this fruit of the Spirit. And it seems that you can only really be in one camp. In another place he kind of describes and says these two are at war with each other. There's conflict, and you're really choosing to be one. Now, let's just review Romans 8, 5, and 6 real quick. Two things that I've picked up from this. One of these paths leads to life, one leads to death. We're talking about our quality of life here. But secondarily, you clearly get a choice. He says you get to set your mind on one of these two. So this main point, there's the first of two main points tonight we have to realize is you can be in control of your emotions. But if you're not, then they are going to control you. The person who does not have any sense of control over their emotions on this side, it will take them places in life that they do not want to go. I was just talking to a kid last hour who has a problem with anger. He almost got taken out of the game this weekend just because his rage called him to not only call out another player with some colorful language, but a referee as well, because he had no control over it. It had control over him. So you can be in control of your emotions, or your emotions can be in control of you. One of the two is going to happen. And we don't want our emotions to define us. Rather, we want our faith influencing our acts and emotions. And so we need to decide which one we're going to live for, and maybe give ourselves a little test and figure out exactly where we lie. You see, another reason I like these little guys right here is something I already mentioned already. I can look at them, and I can see what fruit they are. The color of this one is yellow. I know that this is a lemon gummy bear before I stick it in my mouth. Yep. Absolutely. I got a little mustache hair in there with that. It's disgusting. Here's the deal. I can tell from the outside what the inside's going to be like. Just in the same way, like everybody else around you can look at the fruits of your life and see what you're living for. Jesus said it himself this way in Matthew chapter 7, verse 20. Maybe. Okay, good. I do have it in the slideshow. Thus, by their fruit you will recognize them. The person that you see in class that is just this walking ball of hatred and anger and bitterness and jealousy and divisiveness, it doesn't take much to see what's in their hearts. The person who is kindness, peace, gentleness, it's very evident what's in their heart. You see the fruits in their life, so you know what's on the inside. And so the second takeaway point is that your attitudes and your actions, they're going to show where your heart is. And so if you took a moment to silently take stock of the fruit that you're producing, what would it look like? You just like have a bunch of nasty, rotten fruit hanging from your tree limbs? Or do you have good fruit? And once you see that, then you can make a decision real easily about what you're letting guide your emotions. Your flesh or God's Spirit. And I would encourage you that we know from the first verse that we already read that the flesh leads to death and God's Spirit leads to life. And that fits in this whole series that we're doing this year, and we're focusing in this idea that whoever finds God, what? Come on, guys, you're so weak, all right? All right. But this is exactly what that is about. People who want to have life in their life. Yeah, life in their life. Clearly, we need to be seeking after God's Spirit. It helps us make the right choices in mastering our emotions. Let me share one more verse with you all. It's from Galatians chapter 5, and it's right before he breaks down all the emotions that we will be talking about in the next 2 weeks. We'll talk about bad stuff next week and the good stuff the week after that. But let's just look at this section right here. He says, "So I say, walk by the Spirit, and you will not gratify the desires of the flesh. For the flesh desires what's contrary to the Spirit, and the Spirit what is contrary to the flesh." They are at battle. And if you've got this mixed kind of fruit like in your life, a little good, a little bad, maybe it's clear that you haven't quite made that decision to actually live with God's Spirit rather than just seeking after what the flesh wants. And that's the first step in all of this, is to master control of ourselves. We got to look outside of ourselves for some guidance. And for some of you guys tonight, that might just mean that you're praying and saying, God, I'm ready to relinquish control here. I don't want to try to continue to govern myself, because when I live by the flesh, I'm just making decisions that I'll regret that lead to death. I want to make decisions that lead towards life. And maybe some of you all, though, you've made that decision, but you haven't been committed to really following after it daily. Just like you got to take care of a plant regularly to get that good harvest, you guys have to be finding God's Spirit daily. And maybe it means you need to be getting in a YouVersion Bible plan and growing there. Or maybe it's there's just so much negativity, emotional stuff around you that you need to have some constant input of God's Spirit and the good stuff. And so we want to direct you towards that. There's Bible plans that we can show you guys that you can check out. If you need some just positive voices outside of that, we've got a brand new Spotify playlist that we're going to be putting out that you guys can see on our Instagram and everything else. It's designed off the series. You'll see this artwork on there, so you know you found the right one. The playlist is called All the Feels. And so if you are being overwhelmed in those areas of emotions, you might find something in there that can help you out. But whatever it is, it's definitely leaning on God's Spirit rather than ourselves so that we can make the right decision. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for the opportunity to share this and just seeing so clearly this idea that there is a choice to make, a mindset where we can let our emotions be in control and it's going to bring death, or we can live by your Spirit in something that can actually do quite the opposite, bring life. And of course we want that. We've probably all experienced the horrendous things that we have brought on ourselves because we thought we were better to make the decisions and trying to be in control. And we've seen it fail, and I think we're all tired of it. And so I'd ask that you would put your Spirit in us, that you would convict us and move us to stop living lives of the flesh, but instead decide to make lives of the Spirit, God. And so as we sing, please just stir in our hearts where we may need to start examining where is that bad fruit, and cut that out, God. So be with us in our group time after this, and I hope that can lead to great growth. In your name we pray.